Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am back with my July wrap-up. This will mostly center around Jane Austen July, however I did read a bunch of other books in July as well. I read so much in July. I am so proud of myself, but that means we have a lot to talk about. First of all, some other extra details. Number one, yes, they are still doing construction on a plot of land down the roads, so apologies if you can hear trucks backing up or other construction noise. In addition, in the last of my Austen t-shirts to show off, I'm wearing my Pride and Prejudice t-shirt from Lithographs. So we have some lovely Regency ladies and gentlemen made out of the words of Pride and Prejudice. Lithographs make all sorts of items from all sorts of books in this same style. They have several different Austen books, all kinds of other classics. They have blankets, mugs, scarves, everything you can think of. So first, let's talk about my Jane Austen July reads. The group read this year was Emma, so of course I reread Emma. Of course I gave it 5 stars. I always love Emma every time I read it or watch it, and this time was no different. The only thing I did pick up on that I had never noticed before is how much Mrs. Elton talks. And I realized she talks almost as much as Miss Bates does. But I feel like that's very rarely talked about, and it's something I only just noticed. So I'm curious to see if that bothered any of you as well. Then for my non-novel work of Austen's, I read this book, which is 2 Histories of England, because it has Jane Austen's The History of England, which she wrote when she was quite young, in the first half. And in the second half, you get to compare that with Dickens's A Child's History of England. I have to say I much prefer Austen's. And it's not just because I am more partial to Austen. I later described it to my family as Dickens takes 3 times as long to discuss 3 times less time than Austen does. Austen is far more efficient and far more funny. Dickens did have one moment. I will give him that. But beyond that, I just got so bored so quickly. I much prefer Austen's look at history. Then for my work by a contemporary of Austen's, I did have to stretch this a little bit, and I picked up Love in Excess by Eliza Haywood. And this was one of my major disappointments of the month, I have to say. Eliza Haywood was writing in the earlier part of the 1700s, so not necessarily a contemporary of Austen's, but a female writer that Austen very well could have been influenced by and could have read herself. This sounded quite interesting. It's described on the back as 2 wealthy young women competing for the love of one man, and the various intrigues and the great lengths that they go to try to make that happen. However, it just gets more and more absurd as the pages go on, and not even in a funny way. The amount of characters that are introduced that have very similar names is not helpful. And then all of these outrageous lengths that they're going to try and seduce each other. You just completely lose track of who's in whose bed, who's mad at who. It's like reality television, but worse. I really didn't follow it. And so I thought, all right, before I talk it out to you all, I should really look at an online summary of what I just read to make sure that I kind of had everything straight. Reading that online summary was just as confusing. So, not a read I recommend, but glad I got through it. For my non-fiction about Austen or the Regency era, I read Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney. I was very lucky to win this from Goodreads, And I've been saving it for Jane Austen July, and I'm very, very glad I did. It was really quite lovely. The whole premise, if you haven't heard about it, which I would be quite surprised because it's really been making the rounds this year, is that Rebecca Romney tried to find justice for a lot of Austen's contemporaries, other women writers who were writing around the same time that Austen did, and women that Austen would have been influenced by or responding to. And finding justice for them in terms of, why is Austen part of the literary canon and yet these women are not? And so it's part biography of them and part literary study. I am quite proud to say that I had read from quite a few of these authors beforehand. I would say about half. A lot of them during my university years. So hooray for Gettysburg for having all of these writers on their curricula. So I have to say I was feeling a bit smug about that. But this does now give me a lot of authors to also look into for future Jane Austen Julys, for that read a book by Austen's contemporaries prompt. So hopefully I get to dig into this and maybe leave Eliza Haywood for right now. And for those who are desperately curious which novelists I have read from, let me go to the contents here. I read from Frances Byrne. I read Evelina in university. I've read several books by Anne Radcliffe. I did read The Female Quixote by Charlotte Lennox. I knew of Hannah More as an evangelist, mainly from watching the film Amazing Grace. I haven't read her novel, but I knew who she was, at least. I knew of Elizabeth Inchbald. I haven't read Lover's Vows yet, but I knew that she wrote it, and I knew the basic plot of that play. And I also read, was it Belinda by Maria Edgeworth? I have to say, I didn't love that one. And I read that, I think possibly my first Jane Austen July. So that's over half the authors that I was already familiar with, so I'm quite pleased about that. Then the prompt I always have the most to talk about for is the reading a retelling or a book set in the Regency period. So the two physical books I read for this were, number one, The Rushworth Family Plot by Claudia Gray, which is book 4 in her Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney mystery series. So I can't tell you too much about this one. But in the whole series, we are following the son, one of the sons of the Darcys, and the daughter of the Tilneys, as they are meeting various other characters from other Austen novels. And inevitably, there is always some sort of mystery that happens wherever they meet each other. And they find out that they are quite good at working together to solve that mystery. The young Mr. Darcy is definitely written as definitely neurodivergent, probably autistic. He's never named as such because, of course, Regency Society didn't have the words to talk about that. But that is definitely how it's written, and I believe very compassionately done. But then again, I am not within that demographic, so I leave that up to you. And in this one, you may have guessed from the title, Miss Tilney and Mr. Darcy are meeting and interacting with characters from Mansfield Park. It was very, very good. It was incredibly gripping, as always. It did fascinating things with all of Austen's characters. My mother and I shared this, and we both felt a little bit tired of the tension between the Tilneys and the Darcys. We feel like it's gone on a bit too much, but I feel like Gray will probably drag that out at least 2 more books, because I think she's going through Austen's novels in publication order. So that means we will probably go to Emma characters with the 5th book, and then probably Northanger Abbey in the 6th. And I feel like that's really where the most opportunity exists for that plotline to be solved. I was incredibly nervous towards the end. I foresaw it going in one direction, and I really, really didn't want it to. It did not go in that direction, at least, for which I am very, very grateful. And in all likelihood, it has left us in a much easier predicament to get out of. So I am desperate for book 5, which I'm guessing will come out next summer. So very highly recommend this whole series, and especially this book. The other physical retelling I read is Much Ado About Nada by Uzma Jalaluddin. And she has written several books. Her most famous is Aisha at Last, which is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. Her second book I really, really loved, but I don't think it's an Austen retelling, at least not explicitly so. This one, however, her third novel, is another Austen retelling, and it's a retelling of Persuasion. So we are following Nada, who hoped to be a tech entrepreneur, and she hoped to create an app that would really benefit the Muslim community, but she was thwarted there. And we also follow her relationship with Baz Haq. And very few people know the true history between her and Baz, but it has lasted a very long time with many, many twists and turns. And if you've read Persuasion, of course, you know part of that story. What I loved about this is that it was so much more complicated than the Persuasion storyline is, which I think is reflective of modern society, but I think is very unusual in terms of the Muslim community, especially this Muslim community, which is portrayed as very traditional, very insular, because everyone has first-generation immigrant parents. And the thing I loved is that everyone here is painted with a lot of compassion, even in moments where you absolutely hate what they are doing. It still manages to pull at your heartstrings. This was really masterfully done. I wouldn't say it's as joyful a read as Aisha at Last, but it was still very, very well done and a very interesting retelling. Then I made a serious dent on my ARC stack. So I read several ebooks that were also retellings of Austen or set in the Regency period. So I will be looking down at my list to remind me of which one I'm talking about. The first one I read was Miss Caroline Bingley, Private Investigator by Kelly Gardiner and Sharmini Kumar. And this one I really wasn't sure what to expect. It clearly follows Caroline Bingley. It gives her the heroine detective position in some sort of mystery. But beyond that, I really wasn't sure how that was going to work. But I found that it worked incredibly brilliantly. It opens with Georgiana Darcy having run away from home, and Caroline, knowing this is incredibly unusual, but figures out where she probably is. So she determinedly sets off to find her and find out what on earth is going on. She does find Georgiana, she's safe, she's fine, but it turns out that Georgiana ran away to their London townhouse because her maid disappeared. And she knew this was unusual for her. She knew that her maid had been incredibly worried for herself, for her family, for their safety, for a short period of time leading up to her disappearance. And she was determined to come to London to find her. So Caroline takes it upon herself to do all the sleuthing. And the plot unfolds from there. I loved that doing this sleuthing gave Caroline a sense of purpose, and it made her far more human, because I think that's really why she is so awful in Pride and Prejudice, is that she has nothing else to occupy herself with. And in sleuthing, she is able to put those brains to a far better use. I also loved that this book highlighted what life was like for Indian families in Regency England. If there is any sort of racial diversity touched upon in Regency novels, it usually focuses on Black people in Regency society, on the abolition movement, that whole side of things, which is also very important. But I love that this focused on the Empire and how that translated to life in London as well for British Indians, and the way that it challenged a lot of the ways that Caroline and Georgiana thought about their own staff in a way that did not feel incredibly inaccurate. I really, really loved this one, so if you get a chance to read it, definitely do. I then also read 6 Weeks by the Sea by Paula Byrne. And I love Paula Byrne. I've read a lot of her nonfiction books, so I was really, really excited when this fiction book came out. This is her take on the basically myth. We have very little information about it. When Jane and her family spent a few weeks by the sea during their moves from house to house, supposedly Jane met a man there who could have been the love of her life, but things didn't work out. They never saw him again. I believe he died sometime later, and it just was not meant to be. So this is her take on how that might have fallen out. It is beautiful, it is lyrical, it is very internal. Again, I loved the way it touched on a lot of the racial questions that were beginning to crop up in Regency society. It felt very much like Miss Austen by Jill Hornby in terms of its internalness, which I'll touch on again later on. But I also highly, highly recommend this. We have a lot of books to get through, so I'm going to start moving just a little bit faster, so apologies. I then read The Austen Affair by Madeline Bell, which was a lot of fun. This is a romance novel using the enemies to lovers trope about two actors who are cast in a new adaptation of Northanger Abbey. And they can't stand each other for whatever reason. Our leading actress is also grieving the loss of her mother. And all of this comes to a head one day when they are filming, but then this thunderstorm rolls in. They are struck by lightning, this duo, and that lightning strike transports them back to Regency, England, where they are discovered by the owners of the manor that they were filming at, and also discover that that manor house was owned by the actor's ancestors, and they mistake him for one of his ancestors. And complications ensue from there. It's a romance novel, so of course they grow to a better understanding of one another. It was such fun. They had very open communication, which I really appreciated. It does get a little bit spicy towards the end, if that matters to you, but I found it quite fun. Especially the fact that Northanger Abbey was given some love, which I feel like it is rarely given. Then the last arc that I read that was Austen themed was Sense and Suitability by Pepper Basham. Pepper Basham is a Christian writer, and I've read several of her contemporary romances so far, but this is a purely historical romance. And it's using the persuasion trope in that our two main characters were very much in love with one another, but then on the night when she thinks he was going to propose, she gets a note from him saying that everything has changed, I'm so sorry, and then does not see him again for a couple of years. Naturally, she is very upset and angry about this. Meanwhile, we discover exactly what this lord has been up to that changed everything and how that has been affecting him. And now they are thrown together again, and we see, can they come to a better understanding? Again, it's a romance novel. You know where that plotline is going. They had fairly open communication, which I quite liked, but this felt a bit tired to me, and that may have been the mood I was in at the time. but I feel like Pepper uses the same plot devices to get her characters to where they need to be by the end of the novel, and I'm really looking for something different. Especially the cute children trope. I love when children are included in romance novels. I think that's very much a reality for a lot of people, but it's been in every single one of her novels that I've read at this point, and I'm a little bit tired of it. I want to see another way that a romance can develop, rather than just through the mediation of adorably comic children. My final 2 Jane Austen July notes were the watching prompts, and so for the direct adaptation, I did not do the group watch of Emma 2020. I no longer hate it as much as I did. The 2022 Persuasion put that in a very different perspective for me, but I still prefer the 2009. I think purely because the novel A is given more space, so they could include a lot more plot points. It feels like the plot can breathe a bit more and unfold a bit more naturally. And I think the writing, I should say, was a lot better. I love a lot of the actors that they chose to be in the 2020 Emma, especially the smaller side characters. But I feel like they weren't given a lot to do, and the type of humor that it was aiming for wasn't right. It didn't land correctly for me. Whereas the 2009 has beautiful, funny moments. It has deeply hurtful moments, deeply emotional moments. And I feel like it hits the novel's colors a lot better. For my retelling of Austen watching prompt, again, I bent this a little bit, and I watched the adaptation of Miss Austen by Jill Hornby. I recorded it from PBS back in May, which is how it was broadcast here in the US, and I've been saving it for Jane Austen July because I knew it would fit this prompt really well. I really enjoyed the book when I read it, and I had heard really great things about the series, and don't get me wrong, it was good. It was very good. It was very well acted. I enjoyed a lot of the actors that they cast. Of course, I cried at the ending. How can you not? But there was something just slightly missing for me. And I think it's the fact that Miss Austen, again, is a very internal book. You are inside Cassandra's thoughts so much that I think it would be very hard to put that emotional element on screen. Yes, they had the flashback moments, but we don't always get the tinge of Cassandra's thoughts on those moments the way we quite do in the novel. I still loved it. I thought it was very, very good, but there was just that slight thing missing for me for most of the adaptation. We still have 4 books to go. Thank you for hanging in there with me if you have made it this far. I read 4 non-Jane Austen related books also in July. The first was finishing the audiobook of The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. This is book 2 in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. I wanted to listen to this one on audiobook because it is narrated by Nicola Coughlan, and I love her as an audiobook narrator. And oh my gosh, this one was so good. Just as good as the first one, just as compelling, just as frustrating and enraging as the first one. This one centers around witch trials, both real and metaphorical, and especially being in the States in this day and age, that hit hard. And I would come home so anxious and so frustrated, and but in the best possible way, because you knew that book was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. So I still cannot recommend this series enough. It is just amazing. If you are at all interested or even thinking about trying it, I highly, highly encourage you to do so. I also received an arc of Scotch on the Rocks by Elliot Fletcher, which is the sequel to Whiskey Business, which I read back in June. This is a contemporary romance that takes place in Scotland on, I believe, the Isle of Skye. Or if not, it's definitely based on the Isle of Skye. And it focuses on the McCabe brothers, which every time I read that, I read it as the Maccabee brothers, which would be a very different novel. But nonetheless, the McCabe brothers run a distillery on the Isle of Skye. Book 1 looked at Malcolm as he meets up with April, a childhood friend, also an actress. They discover if they can make a romance work. Here we definitely have enemies to lovers. We are following the second McCabe brother, who we definitely meet in Whiskey Business as well, and his relationship with April's friend Juniper? Yes, because my cousin is also Juniper, so that always stuck out to me. And Juniper's history with the McCabe brothers is incredibly complicated, because Juniper was engaged to the third McCabe brother, Alistair. However, that fell apart, and she and Callum have hated each other, but also desperately desired each other ever since. And it's about the two of them coming to terms with their own issues with their own families, while also discovering, can they make this work? Can they let go of the past enough to truly make a relationship work? I didn't love it quite as much as Whiskey Business, but it was still a really fun read. The book also comes with a playlist, so you get a new song for every chapter, which is just delightful. These are incredibly spicy. Again, if that matters to you, maybe this is not the book for you. But if you don't mind spice, highly recommend the whole series. Then I'm going to rush through these last two. I listened to Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. I'd been hearing a lot about it. I was curious. I listened to it. Again, the way it looked at sexism made me incredibly frustrated. But after a while, I did get a bit bored with how desperately dark and tragic everything was. And the way everyone was related to each other could be seen as serendipity. It also could be seen as highly convenient and semi-contrived. So it was an okay read. I'm glad I read it. Not one I'm going to go back to, I don't think. And then lastly, we have Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. I had been hearing polar opposite reviews. People adore it or they despise it. And I was really curious to see where I was going to fall, because I'd heard it's really good for fans of Made in Chelsea. Reality TV, especially British reality TV, is my kryptonite. So I was very intrigued by that parallel. I hated this book. I hated this book so much. It was just so frustrating watching these people who are terrible for each other and to each other not be able to give each other up even when they recognize that they are not good to each other. The way that everyone is destroying everyone else's lives is just horrific to sit through. The writing isn't very good. It's very plain writing. Plus, there have been rumors surrounding Jessa Hastings' NAI that made it plunge even further in my estimations. It is just terrible. And I reached the end and I did not care about any of these people anymore. And I don't know how she has now stretched it into 4 other novels that are huge. They're big chunkers. How? Why? Why are we... So yes, do not recommend that book at all. Terrible people all around. Could not stand any of them. That is my short and sweet summary of how I feel about that. And we are just in time. I have an event starting in 1 minute that I need to tune into. So if you made it through this mammoth video, leave me a comment down below of anything. An emoji that you think fits, or your favorite read of the month, or a question for me, or a recommendation. Anything at all. Leave me something so I know you made it to the end. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.